What if the stories were real? For generations, whispers of a creature have echoed from the deepest parts of North America's wilderness. A giant bipedal ape, covered in hair, that walks the line between myth and reality. We call it Sasquatch, Bigfoot. For many, it's nothing more than a campfire story, a piece of North American folklore. But for some, it is terrifyingly real. We've journeyed into the deepest corners of Reddit, the modern-day campfire for the strange and unexplained, to unearth some of the most chilling and detailed first-hand Bigfoot encounters ever shared. These aren't just vague tales. They're unsettling accounts from the remote forests of the Pacific Northwest and the ancient Appalachian Mountains, shared by people who went into the woods and came back changed. These stories are so raw, they might just make you question what you think you know about the empty spaces on the map. They might just make you wonder if something is really out there. We begin in the dense, rain-soaked forests of the Pacific Northwest, a place that has long been the epicenter of the Bigfoot legend. This story comes from a user who, for our purposes, we'll just call Mark. Mark was an experienced hunter and outdoorsman, not the kind of guy to make things up. He'd spent his entire life in the woods and thought he knew every sound, every track, every shadow. He was wrong. Mark was now on high alert. He had his .30-06 rifle in his lap and a powerful flashlight. He wasn't thinking about bears or cougars anymore. The sheer volume and strangeness of the calls ruled them out. He felt a primal fear he hadn't felt since he was a kid afraid of the dark. He was being watched, surrounded. He spent the next hour frozen, listening as the whoops and calls moved through the forest around him. Sometimes they were miles away. Other times they sounded unnervingly close, just past the ring of his firelight. He could hear subtle movements in the underbrush, a branch snapping, a heavy footfall. Whatever was out there, there was more than one, and they were communicating. But the real terror began with the scream of an elk. It was a sound of pure agony, a high-pitched bugle cut short with a sickening, wet gurgle. It came from a clearing about 300 yards from his camp. Mark knew the sound of an elk being taken down by predators, but this was different. There was no struggle, no prolonged fight, just the initial scream, followed by a series of horrifying sounds. The sound of something massive being torn apart, the heavy, rhythmic thump of something being slammed against the ground. And through it all, a low, continuous growl, a guttural rumble of satisfaction, punctuated by chattering and strange, mumble-like vocalizations. Mark was a seasoned hunter. He'd field-dressed dozens of animals. He knew the sounds of bones breaking, of a carcass being opened. This was that, but amplified. The force required to make the sounds he was hearing was staggering. A pack of wolves or a grizzly couldn't do this, not with this speed and brutality. He pointed his flashlight toward the sound, but the beam was swallowed by the dark. He couldn't see anything. But he could hear it. He could hear them. The feeding went on for what felt like an eternity. He heard deep, throaty sounds, like a language he couldn't understand. A bizarre mix of grunts and clicks that some researchers have dubbed samurai chatter. It sounded intelligent, conversational, and utterly alien. Paralyzed by fear, Mark did the only thing he could do. He stayed in his small circle of light, feeding the fire until dawn. As soon as the sky began to lighten, he packed his camp with frantic speed, not even bothering to put out the fire. He had to pass the clearing to get back to the logging road. He approached it with his rifle raised, his heart pounding. The scene was worse than he could have imagined. It was carnage. A large bull elk lay in the middle of the clearing, or what was left of it. The animal had been torn in half. Its entire hind section was simply gone, ripped away with unimaginable force. The ground was soaked with blood, but there was a strange lack of tracks, no wolf or bear prints. Just a few massive, indistinct impressions in the soft earth, each nearly twice the size of his own boot. One of the elk's legs had been snapped at the femur, the massive bone shattered like a twig. But the most chilling detail was a tree next to the carcass. About 10 feet up the trunk of a large Douglas fir were deep gouges in the bark, matted with blood and dark, coarse hair. It looked as though the elk had been slammed against the tree repeatedly. No bear could reach that high with that kind of leverage. Mark didn't linger. He practically ran the remaining miles back to his truck, looking over his shoulder every few seconds, the feeling of being watched never leaving him. He told his story on a Reddit forum years later, ending with a simple statement. "I've hunted my whole life. I've seen what bears and cougars can do. What I saw in that clearing was not made by any animal I know. It was made by a monster. I sold my hunting gear, and I have never set foot in that forest again. What would you have done? Would you have stayed the night? Or would your legs have thought for you?" These accounts of immense power and sounds that defy explanation are a common thread in these stories. But our next one takes us across the country to a place just as old and mysterious, the Appalachian Mountains. Section 2. The Watcher on the Ridge. The Appalachian Mountains are ancient, weathered, and shrouded in mist and folklore. For centuries, these hills have been home to tales of strange creatures, of things that live in the deep, dark hollows where the sun rarely touches. This story comes from a user we'll call Appalachian Sun, and it's not about one encounter, but a lifetime of them. It's a family legacy, passed down from his grandfather to his father to him. His family has owned the same plot of land in a remote corner of West Virginia for over 100 years. It's a small farm nestled in a valley, flanked on all sides by steep, wooded ridges. His grandfather, a coal miner and farmer, was the first to speak of what he called the ridge walkers or the old men of the woods. He didn't call them Bigfoot. That was a term from out west. To him, they were just a part of the mountain, a dangerous, intelligent, and very real part. He taught his son, the narrator's father, the rules of their land. Never go into the woods after dark. If you hear your name called from the trees, you don't answer. And if you find a strange structure of woven branches, you turn around, walk away, and don't come back. The first documented encounter in the family happened to the narrator's grandfather in the 1950s. Was out checking his property line after some chickens and a few goats had gone missing. Walking along the main ridge overlooking their farm, he felt that familiar sensation of being watched. He stopped and scanned the trees. High up on the next ridge over, silhouetted against the afternoon sun, stood a figure. It was massive, at least 8 feet tall, and covered in dark reddish-brown hair. It stood perfectly still, like a statue, just watching him. My grandfather, a man who feared very little, slowly raised his rifle, not to shoot, but just to get a better look through the scope. As soon as he did, the figure turned and walked back into the trees, not with the panicked scramble of a bear, but with a fluid, two-legged stride. It moved with an unnerving grace and speed, disappearing into the thick foliage in seconds. Over the years, the encounters became a part of their lives. They were mostly sounds. At night, especially in the late fall, the valley would fill with incredible vocalizations. Deep, booming whoops that echoed from ridge to ridge. The sharp crack of wood on wood. And sometimes something far more unsettling, mimicry. The narrator's father tells a story from when he was a teenager. He was on the porch late one night when he heard a baby crying from the edge of the woods. It sounded desperate. He was about to run towards it when his father, the narrator's grandfather, grabbed him. He was pale. "That's no baby," he whispered. "You never, ever follow that sound." They stood there for nearly an hour as the crying continued, a perfect imitation, seemingly designed to lure someone into the darkness. When the narrator was a child in the 1990s, he had his own experiences. His bedroom window faced the main ridge. He would often wake up in the middle of the night and see what he thought were two faint, green lights watching the house from the tree line. They were too high off the ground to be a deer, and they were eye level with his second-story window. He'd watch them, and they'd watch him, sometimes for hours, until they would simply blink out. The most terrifying encounter for the narrator happened when he was about 16. He and his father were repairing a fence near a dense patch of woods they called the Tangle. His father had always warned him to never go in there. As they worked, a disgusting stench rolled over them. It was a putrid, gag-inducing smell, like rotting meat, wet dog, and something musky and unidentifiable. It made their eyes water. Then they heard movement in the Tangle. It wasn't a deer or a bear. It was something enormous moving slowly, deliberately breaking branches as it went. It was circling them, staying just inside the tree cover. The narrator's father, a calm, stoic man, simply stopped working. He looked at his son and said in a low voice, "We're done for the day. Pick up the tools. Don't run." We walked back to the house now. As they gathered their things, a low growl came from the woods. It was so deep, it felt like a physical vibration in the air, a bass rumble you feel in your bones. It didn't feel like an animal's growl of aggression, but a clear, intelligent warning. A command, leave. They walked back to the house, the sound of the creature pacing them from within the trees the entire way. They never saw it, but they felt its presence with every step. The narrator said he could feel its eyes on his back, a pressure that was both physical and psychological. When they reached the safety of their home, his father locked the door, sat at the kitchen table, and didn't speak for an hour. The user concluded his post by saying that his family still lives on that land. They coexist. They understand they might not be the only intelligent beings in those mountains. They respect the boundaries, and in return, they are mostly left alone. But they never forget they're being watched. For his family, Bigfoot isn't a question of belief. It's just a fact of life. These stories, passed down through generations, carry a weight that's hard to dismiss, even if they are just stories. It makes you wonder how many other families in these remote regions have similar traditions and warnings about what lurks in the woods. Have you ever heard stories like this in your own family? Let us know in the comments below. And if you're finding these accounts as chilling as we are, consider liking this video and subscribing. We descend into these forums to bring you the most compelling stories out there, and your support helps us continue the search. Now, let's get back to the wilderness. Section 3. The Researcher's Thermal Footage. Our first two stories come from people who weren't looking for anything, but stumbled into a world they didn't know existed. But what about those who go looking for it? This next story comes from a Redditor, a self-proclaimed amateur researcher we'll call David, who invested thousands of dollars into equipment to prove the existence of what he calls a true North American great ape. For years, David believed Bigfoot was a biological animal, not something paranormal. He was convinced the key to proving it existed lay in technology, specifically high-resolution thermal imaging. A person in a costume would show up differently on a thermal camera blotchy, uneven, and it wouldn't radiate heat like a living mammal. A real animal would glow with a consistent, solid heat signature. After months of research, David focused on a remote, undisclosed area in Oregon's Blue Mountains, a hotbed of reported activity. He finally found a promising spot, a secluded valley with a creek, surrounded by incredibly steep, rugged terrain. He set up a base camp to spend a week there, deploying an array of equipment, microphones, game cameras, and his prized possession, a military-grade thermal monocular. For the first 4 nights, nothing. The forest was quiet, almost too quiet. He was starting to get discouraged. On the 5th night, that changed. He was sitting in his camp around 1 a.m., slowly scanning the opposing ridge with his thermal monocular. The world through the lens was a sea of cool blues and purples, punctuated by the warm white signature of a deer or rabbit. Then he saw it. High on the ridge, about 400 yards away, a massive heat signature appeared from behind some rocks. It was bright white, indicating intense body heat. And it was big, very big. At first, he thought it might be a bear, but the shape was wrong. It was tall and upright. It moved with a two-legged gait, swinging long arms in a way that was distinctly primate-like. His heart hammered against his ribs. This was it. He fumbled with the cable to connect his monocular to a portable recording device. He had to get this on film. As he watched, the creature moved along the ridge with a fluid, confident stride. It seemed to be aware of its surroundings, stopping every so often to look down towards the valley towards him. Even at this distance, he could make out the immense bulk of its shoulders and the conical shape of its head. Then it did something that froze his blood. It raised its head and let out a roar. He couldn't hear it from that distance, but he saw it on the thermal imager. He saw its chest expand and a plume of hot air erupt from its mouth, a visible cloud of heat in the cold night air. It was a display of sheer power. He finally connected the recorder and began to capture the footage. The creature continued its patrol along the ridge before descending into a ravine, its heat signature swallowed by the landscape. David was shaking from both the cold and the adrenaline. He had done it. He had captured clear thermal footage of a Sasquatch. He checked his recording device. The screen was black. In his haste, he hadn't seated the cable correctly. It hadn't recorded a single frame. He was devastated, but also more certain than ever. The image of that massive, glowing figure was burned into his memory. He decided to stay for the remaining 2 nights. The next night, he was ready, recorder running. Around 3 a.m., he heard a loud crack from the woods directly behind his tent, no more than 50 yards away. It was a wood knock, but it was deafeningly close. He swung the thermal monocular around, hands trembling, and scanned the dense forest. Nothing, just the cool purple of the trees. Then he caught a flicker of white. Something was peeking out from behind a massive pine tree. He focused the monocular. 2 bright, round circles of heat were visible, about 7 feet off the ground. Eyes, and below them, the faint heat signature of a nose and mouth. It was watching him. It had circled around, coming down from the ridge under the cover of darkness, and was now observing him from just beyond his campsite. He could feel the intelligence behind those eyes. This wasn't just a curious animal. It was studying him. He didn't dare move. He just stared back through the monocular. For a full 10 minutes, they were locked in a silent standoff. Then, as silently as it appeared, the head pulled back behind the tree and vanished. He scanned the area for another hour, but the creature was gone. David posted his story on Reddit, a mix of triumph and frustration. He had no proof to show the world, only his word. He ended his post not with fear, but with a renewed sense of purpose. He knows what he saw, and he is determined to go back and capture the evidence that will, in his words, finally force science to open its mind. Section 4. The Creature in the Headlights. For our final story, we move from a patient stackout to a fleeting, terrifying moment of pure chance. This account, posted by a user named Jenna, is one of the most harrowing. Jenna was a traveling nurse working late shifts in rural Northern California. One winter night, she was driving home after a grueling 12-hour shift. It was well after midnight, and she was on a deserted 2-lane highway cutting through a dense redwood forest. The road was slick with rain, and thick fog reduced visibility. She was tired and just wanted to get home. As she came around a sharp bend, her headlights landed on something in the middle of the road. Her first thought was a deer, and she slammed on the brakes, her car skidding on the wet asphalt. But it wasn't a deer. Standing in her lane, illuminated by her headlights, was a creature so impossible her mind struggled to process it. It was at least 8 feet tall, maybe taller, covered head to toe in shaggy, matted, dark brown hair slick with rain. Its body was powerfully built, with long muscular arms that hung past its knees. It was hunched over something on the road. As her car slid to a stop less than 50 feet away, the creature straightened up and turned to look at her. And that's when the true horror set in. Its face, she said, was the stuff of nightmares. It was flat and ape-like, with a low, sloping forehead. But its eyes were what she would never forget. They were large and dark, and seemed to glow with a faint reddish reflection from her headlights. They weren't an animal's eyes. They were intelligent, and they were filled with pure, malevolent anger. It had been crouched over the carcass of a deer, which was torn apart. In one of its massive, human-like hands, it held a piece of the animal. For a moment that stretched into an eternity, they stared at each other. Jenna was frozen, unable to scream or move. The creature stared at her, its lip curled back to reveal large yellowish teeth. It let out a low, guttural growl that she could feel vibrating through the floor of her car. Then it took a step towards her. That single aggressive step broke her paralysis. She threw the car into reverse, tires squealing. She didn't dare take her eyes off it. As she backed away, the creature took another step, then another. It was coming after her. She fumbled with the gear stick, threw the car into drive, and swerved around the creature and the deer carcass, her tires slipping onto the muddy shoulder. She floored it. As she sped past, the creature lunged, its huge hands swiping at the side of her car. She heard a loud thud and a scraping sound. She didn't look back. She drove with tears streaming down her face, hands shaking so badly she could barely hold the steering wheel. She pulled into her garage, locked the door, and collapsed on her kitchen floor, sobbing. The next morning, she went to look at her car. On the rear passenger side door were 3 deep, parallel scratches running through the paint, down to the metal. Smeared along the scratches was something dark and greasy, with coarse, dark hairs stuck in it. She never drove that road at night again. Her Reddit post was a plea for answers. She wrote, "I'm a nurse. I'm a woman of science. I believe in evidence and logic, but I can't explain what I saw. It wasn't a bear. It wasn't a man in a suit. It was real. It was angry, and it tried to get me. I don't care if people believe me or not. I know what I saw." Her story is a chilling reminder that sometimes the monster in the dark feels very, very real. Scientific interlude. Okay, after hearing these deeply personal and terrifying accounts, we have to step back and look at the science. While thousands of people have shared stories like these, mainstream science remains unconvinced, and for some very significant reasons. First, there is a complete lack of physical evidence that can stand up to real scientific scrutiny. Despite countless sightings and photos, there has never been a body, a bone, or a single strand of authenticated DNA from an unknown primate discovered in North America. Proponents argue that bones decompose quickly in wet forests, but experts consistently find the remains of other large animals, like bears and moose. Yet, not a single confirmed Sasquatch skeleton has ever been presented to science. On top of that, many sightings and footprint casts have been attributed to misidentification or outright hoaxes. The most common explanation for sightings is the misidentification of American black bears, which can stand and even walk on 2 legs for short distances. One data scientist even found a strong statistical correlation. On average, 1 Bigfoot sighting is reported for every 5,000 black bears in a given area. From a biological standpoint, there's also the question of a viable breeding population. For a species of this size to exist, there would need to be a population of thousands. Scientists argue a population that large simply couldn't remain hidden in the 21st century, with satellite imagery, drones, and millions of people in the woods. Also, no fossil evidence for any non-human great ape has ever been found in the Americas, making its evolutionary origins a complete mystery. Because of all this, the scientific consensus is that Bigfoot, as a flesh and blood creature, does not exist. The phenomenon is largely considered a product of folklore, misidentification, and human psychology. And yet, the stories persist. The accounts we've shared tonight are just a few drops in a vast ocean of anecdotal evidence. Detailed, consistent reports from credible witnesses who seem to have nothing to gain. People like Mark, forced to abandon his lifelong passion. A family in Appalachia with a century of history. A researcher who saw something undeniable through his thermal lens. And a nurse who was attacked on a lonely road. They, and thousands like them, are left with a chilling certainty. They know what they saw. It leaves us with the unsettling question that believers always ask. Is it possible that the evidence is elusive simply because the creature we are looking for is far more intelligent and far better at staying hidden than we can possibly comprehend? From the rain-soaked forests of Washington to the ancient hollows of the Appalachians, these stories paint a picture of a creature that is powerful, intelligent, and incredibly elusive. We've heard the tale of a hunter who witnessed the aftermath, of a brutal kill, the legacy of a family living on the border of another world, the frustrating near success of a dedicated researcher, and the terrifying roadside encounter of a nurse driving home. These accounts, sourced from Reddit, are the modern-day folklore of our time. They are filled with common threads. The eerie silence before an encounter, the bone-shaking vocalizations, and the feeling of being watched by an unseen intelligence. Science, quite reasonably, demands proof of body, a bone, DNA. Without it, these stories are relegated to the realm of myth and misidentification. But for the people who live them, the proof is in the terror that still haunts them, in the memory of glowing eyes in the darkness, and in the deep scratches left on the side of a car. So what do you think? Are these simply campfire stories, the product of misidentified bears and overactive imaginations? Or are they genuine accounts of something real that continues to defy our attempts to find it? Could thousands of people, separated by geography and decades, all be wrong? Share your thoughts in the comments. Reddit is a strange and wonderful place, a kind of digital campfire where millions of people gather to share stories. But hidden in the deepest corners of the site, there are accounts that feel terrifyingly real, posted by anonymous users who seem to be desperately looking for answers to something that has shaken them to their core. Today, we re-digging through those threads to find 10 of the most chilling and detailed Bigfoot encounters ever shared by Redditors. These aren't just spooky tales. They read stories that will make you think twice about what's really out there in the woods. But before we dive in, let's get something straight. What we're about to talk about is folklore and unverified personal experience. As of November 2025, there is absolutely no scientific evidence that a creature like Bigfoot exists. Mainstream science chalks up sightings to misidentifying known animals like bears, the power of suggestion, or just plain hoaxes. The accounts you're about to hear are being presented exactly as they were told as personal stories. We'll point out the things that witnesses believe are evidence, but remember that these claims, from footprints to strange sounds, have never been backed up by the scientific community. These are stories about fear, the unknown, and how our minds try to make sense of something we can't explain. So turn down the lights, get comfortable, and let's listen to what happens when the deepest parts of the woods stare back. Story number 1. The sound that broke the silence. Our first story drops us in Tobyhanna State Park, Pennsylvania, back in 2014. A Redditor was hiking and found a spot in the woods that felt like another world, a place so beautiful it seemed unreal. For a moment, it was perfect. And then, everything went wrong. The first clue was the silence. An unnatural, heavy quiet fell over the forest. Every bird, every insect, every sound just stopped. If you've ever spent time in the wild, you know that total silence is a bad sign. It's the kind of quiet that means a predator is close, and every smaller animal is holding its breath. Then came the sound. The witness describes it as something between a howl and a roar, and it was deafeningly close. They didn't just hear it. They said they could feel the sound vibrate in their chest, a deep, bone-rattling boom that seemed to come from everywhere at once. This type of powerful, low-frequency roar is a hallmark of classic Sasquatch lore. In that moment, the witness admits all curiosity vanished, replaced by pure animal fear. Their legs, as they put it, thought for them. They just ran, blindly crashing through the undergrowth, fueled by adrenaline, away from that terrifying sound. After what felt like forever, they stumbled upon some restrooms near a campground and found their way back to their car. They never saw what made the sound, but they re-left with a haunting question. What known animal on this continent can make a sound with that much power? What massive, unseen creature was watching them from that beautiful, silent patch of woods? Story number 2, The Stalker on the Ridge. Next, we head to the rugged backcountry of Oregon. A hunter shared this story from a week-long solo trip, miles from any trail, totally alone. He was an experienced outdoorsman, armed with a rifle and a sidearm. The first day was normal. He scouted, found signs of deer, and made camp. But as night fell, he got that awful, gut-wrenching feeling of being watched. He grabbed his rifle and scanned the dark tree line, but saw nothing. The forest, which should have been full of night sounds, was completely quiet. He barely slept, convinced that unseen eyes were fixed on him. At dawn, he hiked to a ridgeline to look for deer. That's when he heard it, a whistle. Not a bird, and not the wind. He described it as deliberate, human-like, but wrong. It came from the trees behind him. He spun around, rifle up, heart pounding. Nothing. An hour later, the whistle came again, this time from the valley below him. He tried to tell himself it was another hunter, but it felt thin. The whistles felt coordinated, like he was being tracked. The unease turned into real fear. The next morning was even worse. He woke up to find huge footprints circling his campsite. He noted they weren't the classic Bigfoot prints from TV, but they were massive, pressed deep into the earth, and made by something incredibly heavy. Now, while tracks are a staple of Bigfoot lore, it's a fact that not a single one has ever been authenticated by science. Misidentifying bear tracks is extremely common. That day, the forest felt hostile. The silence was oppressive, and he kept hearing branches snap just out of sight, as if something was pacing him from the shadows. Then came the smell. He described a gut-wrenching stench of rot and musk, a foul odor mentioned in countless anecdotal reports. That was it. The feeling of being watched, the whistles, the tracks, and the smell. It was too much. He was convinced he was being stalked by something that wasn't human. He packed up in a hurry and hiked out as fast as he could, feeling like he was being followed every single step of the way. Story number 3, The Face in the Window. Not all stories happen in the deep wilderness. Some of the scariest ones happen right where you're supposed to feel safest, at home. This story comes from a Redditor who heard it from a member of an indigenous tribe during a talk with the survivalist Les Stroud. Many First Nations have centuries of stories about large, hairy forest people, which adds a layer of deep cultural context to this account. The man telling the story was just a child. He was at home, in the bathroom, and the window was open. Suddenly, a shadow fell over him. He looked up and saw something that he would never forget. A large, hairy arm was reaching through the open window, its fingers flexing, as if it was about to grab him. He screamed. His father, hearing the sheer panic, grabbed his rifle and ran outside, expecting an intruder or a bear. He got there just in time to see a massive, dark, bipedal creature sprinting away from the house. In a show of incredible power, the creature sprinted to a nearby creek and cleared it in a single, massive leap before vanishing into the woods. The father stood there, rifle in hand, staring in disbelief. The witness, now a grown man, never forgot the sight of that hairy arm reaching into the safety of his home. These property encounters are especially chilling because they break the barrier between the wild unknown and the one place we all feel secure. Story number 4. The Oregon Deputy's Surprise. A person's job can sometimes make their story hit a little different. This account, shared on Reddit, is about an Oregon deputy sheriff, a man trained to be observant and level-headed. He had a favorite spot he'd visit near a river, close to town, not deep in some remote wilderness. He knew the area like the back of his hand. One evening around dusk, he was heading down a familiar embankment when he turned to face the river and his heart stopped. He had surprised a large male Sasquatch just a few feet away. There was no time to think. The deputy scrambled back up the steep embankment, his mind reeling, and heard the creature crashing through the brush right behind him. He broke into a dead sprint for his patrol car, didn't look back, threw himself inside, and slammed on the gas. He drove until he felt safe, then pulled over, completely overwhelmed by horror and confusion. The Redditor sharing the story says the deputy had a total breakdown. The hardest part for him to process wasn't just what he saw, but where he saw it. It wasn't in some vast, unexplored forest. It was just outside of town. We have to be clear. Even though the story comes from a law enforcement officer, no police agency has ever officially confirmed an event like this, or the existence of such a creature. The experience was so traumatic for the deputy that he reportedly relocated all the way to Kansas, far from the dense forests of Oregon. Story number 5. The Knocking in West Virginia. Sometimes the scariest thing isn't what you see, but what you hear. This next story comes from a Redditor in a very rural, wooded part of West Virginia. One night around 10 p.m., they were home when they heard a noise from the deep woods behind their house. It wasn't an animal. It was knocking. They described a distinct pattern: 2 sharp knocks, a pause, then 2 more knocks, repeating for about 10 minutes. The sound itself was what made it so bizarre. It sounded exactly like someone striking 2 large pieces of wood, like 2x4s, together with incredible force. Their house backed onto thick, dense woods with no trails and no other houses. There was no logical reason for anyone to be out there making that kind of noise. This sound, what fans of the lore call wood knocking, is a common claim in Bigfoot circles, believed to be a form of communication. Of course, there's no science to back this up, but the sheer volume described is what unnerves the witnesses. This Redditor said the sound was louder than it had any right to be, as if someone was just fucking up a big tree with an axe handle. The next morning, they searched the area. They found nothing. No footprints, no broken branches, no sign that anything had been there. The witness was left completely shaken, turning them from a skeptic into someone who now thinks it as possible that something unknown is hiding out there. Story number 6. The Thing in the Trees of North Carolina. Our 6th story is a strange one, an encounter that happened in 2 parts, over a decade apart, suggesting something might have been living in the same patch of woods for years. The first incident happened around 2003. The witness, just 14 at the time, was in the woods near their home when they saw something watching them from the trees. They described it as looking like a weird orangutan lemur hybrid. The moment the creature realized it had been spotted, it took off through the canopy and disappeared. For years, the witness looked for news of an escaped zoo animal, but found nothing. Years later, the witness, now an adult, was walking in that same patch of woods. Suddenly, something hard hit them. They'd been nailed by a rock thrown from the dense tree line. Stunned, they looked and saw a small, dark outline ducking behind a tree, as if peeking to see their reaction. Just like before, the moment it knew it was seen, it vanished. Getting a rock thrown at you is another one of those classic behaviors you hear about in Sasquatch stories, often seen as a warning. But just like wood knocking, it's purely anecdotal, with no scientific documentation. For the witness, though, this second event felt like terrifying confirmation. The first sighting could have been their imagination, But being hit by a rock and seeing a figure hiding felt deliberate and very real. They have no plans to ever go back into those woods again. Story number 7. The incident at Thompson Flats. This next story isn't a first-person account, but a dark piece of history dug up by a researcher named Mark Mersel, detailing events from a place called Thompson Flats during the 1800s gold rush. These kinds of historical tales are a huge part of the Bigfoot legend, but they're nearly impossible to verify and often get more dramatic with each retelling. According to the research, the miners at Thompson Flats were facing a threat worse than the wilderness itself. A series of gruesome discoveries began to plague their small community. Miners started turning up dead. Some were found missing their heads. One was discovered buried under a pile of heavy rocks, his body having been beaten to a pulp. One survivor told a horrifying story of being grabbed from behind by what he described as large, hairy arms. He was lifted up and beaten nearly to death. His attacker threw him down a ravine and left him for dead. He only survived because his friends found him. These 19th century accounts from Thompson Flats depict a terrifying level of aggression, suggesting a predatory creature, not just a shy, elusive animal. They form a dark and brutal corner of Bigfoot lore, a reminder that not all alleged encounters are just fleeting glimpses. Story number 8. The Hiker and the Injured Dog. This next story is genuinely hard to read. It suggests a kind of intelligence that's just ... cruel. It was shared on a Reddit thread about the scariest types of encounters and involves a man, his dog Ruby, and a creature. As the story goes, the creature first tried to lure the man deeper into the woods with strange calls or sounds. The man didn't fall for it. When that failed, the creature's tactics allegedly became horribly clever. The man saw his dog, Ruby, on the path ahead, but something was wrong. The dog was obviously and severely injured. Heartbroken, the man rushed forward to help his companion. It was a trap. As he got close to the wounded dog, a large, hairy arm shot out from the woods beside the path. It didn't grab the man, it grabbed the dog. In one final horrific motion, the creature smashed the animal against a tree, killing it instantly. The man was left frozen in horror. According to the story, the creature used the man's love for his dog as a weapon, luring him into a vulnerable position with a display of calculated cruelty. Of all the stories, this one might be the most terrifying for what it implies not about the creature's strength, but about its mind. Story number 9. The Voices in the Uinta Mountains. Now we're heading to the Uinta Mountains in Utah. A Redditor and his wife, both very experienced backpackers, were camped far from any road or trail. One night, his wife woke him up, asking if he heard something. He listened, and a moment later heard it clearly, a loud whoop sound echoing up the valley from below them. He said it sounded exactly like the whooping vocalizations from Bigfoot TV shows. Now, strange sounds have been recorded in the woods for decades. The so-called Sierra sounds are a famous example, but their origin is completely unproven. Skeptics argue it's just known animals or hoaxes, and no scientific study has ever proven otherwise. For the couple in the tent, that debate didn't matter. The sound was real, and it was close. Shortly after the first whoop, a second one answered, this time from higher up the canyon, above their tent. It was unmistakable. It sounded like two individuals communicating, with their tent pitched right in the middle of the conversation. The man admitted he tried to stay calm for his terrified wife. A tough job when you feel like you're caught between two massive, unseen things calling to each other in the dark. He added that his brother had his own sighting in the same mountains, watching a large, black, upright figure through a spotting scope for 45 minutes as it walked across a canyon. Story number 10. The Siege at the Cabin. We're ending with a story that's become a legend in Bigfoot circles, often linked to a man named Fred Roll. It's less of an encounter and more of a full-blown siege. Fred was in a remote cabin when his retreat turned into a nightmare. It started with footsteps and branches snapping outside, but it escalated quickly. The cabin itself came under attack. Heavy thuds began slamming against the walls, impacts so powerful they shook the whole building. It sounded like something massive was throwing its body against the walls, testing for a way in. Then, rocks began to rain down on the metal roof, each bang echoing Fred's own frantic heartbeat. This wasn't a quick glimpse of something in the distance. This was an assault. Fred was trapped, listening to one or more incredibly powerful creatures trying to get to him. The story, and others like it from the infamous Ape Canyon incident, are some of the most famous in Bigfoot lore. But it's important to know that subsequent investigations have found no real evidence, and most experts consider the tale a fabrication or a powerful piece of American folklore. It's a nightmare scenario where you're not just a witness, you're prey. Conclusion. So, what are we left with? From a roar that silenced a forest, to a calculated trap, to a full-on siege, these stories from Reddit paint a terrifying picture. Science has never found a bone, a body, or a single strand of verified DNA. And yet, these personal stories keep surfacing, full of consistent details. The unnatural silence, the foul smell, the incredible power, and a fear that lasts a lifetime. So, what do you think? Are these just stories of misidentification and overactive imaginations? Or are thousands of people, separated by years and miles, all describing a real, undiscovered animal? What would you do if you heard that whistle on a lonely ridge, or saw that face staring back at you through your own window? Have you ever had an experience you couldn't explain? Drop your own stories and theories in the comments below. The conversation is often as fascinating as the accounts themselves. If you thought these stories were as creepy as we did, do us a favor and hit that like button. It really helps the channel out. And make sure you subscribe and click the notification bell so you don't miss our next dive into the strange and unexplained. Thanks for watching. Stay safe out there.